at 11 minutes past midnight on the 3rd of November 1878, the largest wolfhound at Thornbeck Hall stepped out of the dark and chose the one servant nobody had thought to notice. Damaris Holt was carrying folded table linen through the lower passage, while music drifted faintly from the autumn house party above. Candle smoke clung to the low ceiling, and the distant clatter of silver reminded her that upstairs laughter depended upon work no guest ever saw. Then she heard a girl trying not to cry. Damaris set down her basket and opened the linen closet. Bess Calder stood between shelves of sheets with one hand over her mouth. Her grey cuff hung torn from the wrist, and a red mark crossed the skin beneath it. "Who did that?" Damaris asked. Bess shook her head. "No one." "Then the cloth has developed a temper." The attempt at gentleness nearly broke the girl. "Mr. Gresham said I owed the house for wine glasses and scorched linen. I didn't break them." "What did he ask you to sign?" Bess stared at her. "How did you know? Because a torn cuff is not an account." Damaris stepped inside, but left the door partly open. "Tell me only what you choose." Bess drew a shaking breath. A wage acknowledgement. "My name was at the top, but the rest was blank. He said the sum would be entered after I signed. When I refused, he said I'd leave without a character. He said no decent house would take me, and Daniel would lose his place in the lower stable if I caused trouble." Damaris felt the old pressure gather beneath her ribs. A servant without a character did not merely lose one position. She lost the next door and the next. "Did he hold your arm?" "Only my sleeve. It caught on the copying desk when I pulled away." Damaris took her mother's dented silver thimble from her pocket. "Give me your hand." The wrist was reddened but not broken. "This will fade. The cuff can be mended now." "You'll tell Mrs. Yates?" "Yes." Bess jerked back. "Please don't." "Mr. Gresham said Daniel would be accused of taking tools. Then Mrs. Yates must hear that too." "You don't understand." Damaris threaded her needle. "I understand more than I wish to." She turned the cuff inward. A damp scrap of thin tissue clung beneath the seam. Violet letters showed through backward. Damaris stopped. "Did you put this here?" "No." With the needle tip, Damaris eased it free. The tissue was no larger than 2 joined postage stamps. One ragged edge had caught in the thread. Across it, in reversed violet writing, she could make out part of a phrase. "Dishonest conduct." Her mother had once prepared press copies for a lady whose correspondence filled locked drawers. Damp tissue took ink from a freshly written page and preserved its mirror image in a bound book. "Bess, did Mr. Gresham write anything before he asked you to sign?" "He covered the desk when I came in." Damaris folded the tissue inside clean linen. "Do not touch this again." "What is it?" "Possibly very little. Possibly the reason he needed your signature." Something heavy moved in the passage. A vast grey head appeared beyond the partly open door, followed by shoulders broad enough to fill the corridor. Bran, the Duke of Keldale's wolfhound, stood beneath the wall lamp without a sound. 2 kitchen maids at the far turn fled. Bess pressed herself against the shelves. Damaris did not reach for the hound or command him. She opened the door wider and stepped aside, leaving him space to choose. Bran watched her, glanced once at Bess, then lowered his head and crossed the threshold. He lay beside Damaris's skirts, his flank touching the hem without trapping her. "He'll bite," Bess whispered. "He has shown no wish to." Damaris finished the stitch and slipped the thimble into her pocket. "We are going to Mrs. Yates." Bess shook her head. "I can't. You can stop at any point. You can refuse any question. But you won't go back to Mr. Gresham alone." Damaris lifted the basket and held the folded tissue in her other hand. Bran rose and followed. They had nearly reached the turn toward the housekeeper's room when Isaac Gresham appeared from the office stair. He was a narrow man of 50, correctly dressed, with a voice that made threats sound like entries in an account book. His gaze dropped to Bess's repaired cuff, then to the linen square in Damaris's hand. "Miss Calder is required in my office. She is going to Mrs. Yates," Damaris said. "You were not asked." "No." The word caught in her throat. Gresham smiled. "Then don't make your difficulty everyone else's delay." Bess flinched. Damaris forced air into her lungs. "She will not go with you alone." Gresham stepped closer. Bran stood. The movement was silent, but his head came level with Gresham's chest. "Call off that animal." "I haven't called him on. You presume beyond your station." "She is the only person in this passage who asked what the girl was afraid of." The new voice came from behind Gresham. Quentin Kenwood, Duke of Kelldale, stood at the foot of the office stair in evening black. He had left the house party without hat or gloves. His attention moved from Bess's repaired cuff to the fading red mark, then to the linen folded in Damaris's hand. "Your Grace," Gresham began, "this is a minor disciplinary matter. Then it'll survive witnesses." Quentin came down the final step. "Miss Calder will remain with Mrs. Yates. You will not question her alone, dismiss her, alter her wages, or issue any character concerning her until I have heard the matter properly. The smooth running of a house requires, not silence purchased with a blank signature." Gresham's face changed by less than a breath. Quentin looked at Damaris. "What are you holding?" She could feel Gresham waiting for the stammer to make her seem uncertain. A piece of tissue found inside Miss Calder's torn cuff. Quentin did not supply the word. He waited. Damaris steadied herself. "It bears reversed violet writing. The words appear to include dishonest conduct." "May I see it?" She opened the linen. Quentin reached carefully, taking only the edge. Their fingertips touched once. Warm skin against cold. Both withdrew at once. Quentin examined the scrap beneath the lamp. "Do you know what it is? I believe it may be press copy tissue. My mother used such paper in service, but I can't say who wrote the original, or when, from this piece alone." His gaze lifted to hers. He was not watching Bran. He was listening to the limit she placed upon her claim. "Then we'll preserve precisely what it proves, and no more." He returned the tissue to the linen in Damaris's hand. "Take Miss Calder to Mrs. Yates. Keep the fragment with you until it can be sealed before witnesses. Mr. Gresham, you will remain available and touch no copying book or wage paper until instructed." For the first time, Gresham looked afraid. Quentin stepped aside, clearing the way instead of leading it. Damaris walked on with Bess beside her. Bran followed so closely that his shadow touched hers along the stone. Behind them, the Duke watched the linen square in her hand, the girl she was protecting, and the narrow office stair where someone had already begun writing guilt before any crime had occurred. By 9 o'clock on the morning of the 4th of November, the music from Thornbeck Hall's autumn house party had been replaced by the quieter machinery of rank. Breakfast trays moved upstairs. Coal scuttles crossed the service court. Footmen carried messages beneath silver salvers, while in Mrs. Yates's sitting room, 4 people waited for an 18-year-old maid to explain why a blank sheet of paper had frightened her more than dismissal. Bess Calder sat nearest the fire, with her repaired cuff resting in her lap. The redness around her wrist had faded to a pale band. Damaris stood beside the window, still holding the linen square that contained the violet tissue fragment. Mrs. Joan Yates occupied the writing desk. Quentin Kenwood sat opposite Bess rather than behind the housekeeper's table. Leaving the girl an unobstructed path to the door, Bran lay outside the open room, his head between his paws and one broad shoulder visible beyond the threshold. "You may stop whenever you wish," Mrs. Yates said. "No one will send you back to Mr. Gresham's office." Bess looked at Quentin. "Not even if I can't prove what he said?" "Not even then," he answered. "You're being asked what happened, not required to earn the right to be safe while you tell it." The girl drew breath. "Mr. Gresham said I owed the house for 2 wine glasses and a length of scorched linen." Mrs. Yates dipped her pen but did not yet write. "Did you break the glasses?" "No, ma'am." "Did you scorch the linen?" "No." "Did he show you an account?" "Only a paper with my name at the top." Bess rubbed her thumb over the new stitches in her cuff. "The rest was empty. He said I should sign before he entered the amount, because I'd only make mistakes if I tried to understand the figures." Quentin's expression hardened, though his voice remained level. "Did he say what would happen if you refused?" "He said I'd leave without a character," he said. Lady Sybil knew every respectable housekeeper in the county, and no one would take a girl who resisted proper correction. Mrs. Yates's pen paused over the page. Those were his words. "Yes, Mum." "And Daniel?" Damaris asked. Bess's gaze dropped. "He said my brother's place in the lower stable depended on whether I gave trouble. He said a missing tool could be blamed on anyone who spent enough time near the tack room." Damaris felt the familiar pressure close around the first syllable of her next question. She waited until breath returned. "Did Mr. Gresham accuse Daniel of taking anything?" "Not yet." The final word revealed the shape of the threat. It did not need to become an accusation if fear accomplished the same result. Mrs. Yates began writing, recording Bess's words without improvement. Quentin did not interrupt. When Bess had finished, Damaris placed the folded linen on the desk. "The fragment should be examined before it dries further." Mrs. Yates opened the linen with clean fingers. Reversed violet letters shimmered faintly on the thin, damp tissue. Quentin leaned forward, but did not touch it. "Can you read more than you could last night?" Damaris shifted nearer the window. Morning light made the mirror writing clearer. "The phrase dishonest conduct remains visible." She turned the linen slightly. Near the torn edge, 2 numbers appeared beneath a blurred stroke. "There is also part of a date." Mrs. Yates rose and joined her. "What date?" "The 2nd of November." Bess stared at them. "But he didn't call me to the office until last night." Quentin looked from the fragment to the girl. "The 3rd. "Yes, Your Grace." Damaris studied the tissue again. "The date may belong to another entry. The words may not refer to Bess. The fragment is too small to prove either point." Quentin's gaze rested on her face. "But if the date and accusation belong together, the accusation was prepared before the conduct it claims to describe." "Yes, and someone later needed a signature that would make the prepared account appear true." "Possibly." Damaris held his eyes despite the weight of rank behind them. "We should preserve what the fragment shows, not what we hope it shows." Something softened in Quentin's expression. He had expected fear from a servant under scrutiny. He had not expected intellectual restraint from someone with every reason to seize the strongest interpretation. "Precisely," he said. "Mrs." Yates brought a clean envelope from the locked drawer of her desk. Before witnesses, she placed the linen-wrapped fragment inside. She melted sealing wax and pressed her household seal into it. Damaris signed across one edge. Mrs. Yates signed across the other. A ducal solicitor's clerk, summoned from Stokesley before dawn, entered the room with a leather portfolio beneath his arm. He inspected the seal without breaking it. "I will record receipt in Mr. Holden's daybook and place the packet directly in his locked deed box. No copy is to be made yet," Quentin said. "No one opens it without Mrs. Yates, Miss Holt, and a second, named witness present." The clerk inclined his head. "Understood, Your Grace." He wrote the time, the condition of the wax, the 2 signatures, and the description of the packet. Then he gave Mrs. Yates a receipt and carried the envelope away. The fragment left Damaris's possession. For the first time since the linen passage, and every movement had been spoken aloud before it occurred. Quentin waited until the clerk had gone. "Mrs. Yates, from this moment, no junior female servant is to be questioned alone by Mr. Gresham or any male officer of the household. Any wage acknowledgement must state the full sum, the reason, and the date before a signature is requested. You or another senior female servant will witness it." Mrs. Yates nodded. "Yes, Your Grace. No character is to leave Thornbeck with one signature. If it concerns a female servant, yours is required. And if a servant refuses to sign a blank page, then the refusal will be treated as common sense, not disobedience." Bess's shoulders lowered for the first time. Quentin turned toward her. "Your place is not in question, nor is Daniel's. If anyone suggests otherwise, you will report it to Mrs. Yates." "Thank you, Your Grace." "You shouldn't have needed a duke to say it." The door opened before anyone could answer. Lady Sybil Marchmont entered in a dark green travelling dress, carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to being welcomed before she was announced. At 36, she had the composed beauty of a portrait designed to make discomfort appear vulgar. Her brother's investments had failed badly enough that Marchmont Land now supported less splendour than its name implied, but Lady Sybil had preserved her influence through county charities and a placement committee that advised respectable households which servants were safe to employ. Householders called their payments contributions. Lady Sybil called them necessary support for standards. She looked from Bess to Damaris, then to Bran beyond the threshold. "I was told Thornbeck's household had been disturbed by a maid's accusation." Quentin rose. "It has been disturbed by a blank wage paper and a threat against 2 servants. A young girl may misunderstand correction." She understood an empty page. Lady Sybil's gaze settled on Damaris, and Miss Holt understood that bringing the Duke's hound into the matter would make her concern difficult to ignore. Bran lifted his head but did not enter. Damaris felt every eye move toward her. "I didn't bring him," she said. He followed. How fortunate. Lady Sybil's smile held no warmth. "Some women wait years for a duke's notice. You appear to have secured his dog first." Quentin's voice cooled. "Miss Holt's feelings are not yours to invent. I am considering the reputation of your house by creating talk and then offering to protect us from it." Lady Sybil looked at him fully. "Servants who question correction teach others to bargain above their station. Once that habit spreads, every household pays for it. Your concern for payment is noted." A faint stillness entered her face. Quentin continued. "The new safeguards remain. Miss Calder returns to duty under Mrs. Yates. Miss Holt has acted properly." Lady Sybil inclined her head as though accepting a temporary inconvenience rather than defeat. When Damaris left the room, Bran rose and followed at once, his immense body silent beside her. Lady Sybil watched them disappear down the passage. Later, behind the closed door of Gresham's office, she removed one glove finger by finger and said, "A maid without a character has no future to threaten us with." On the 6th of November, Quentin, Kenwood asked Damaris Holt to walk the route Bess Calder had taken on the night of the torn cuff, and, for the first time in her years at Thornbeck Hall, Damaris crossed a service passage while a duke adjusted his pace to hers. Mrs. Yates accompanied them with a notebook tucked beneath one arm. Bran moved between Damaris and Quentin, his massive shoulders nearly brushing both. Though neither had called him, the morning was cold enough that the stone floors held the night's chill, and the smell of beeswax, coal smoke, and damp wool followed them below stairs. Bess had returned to light duties under Mrs. Yates. Her cuff remained neatly mended, and the redness at her wrist had faded to a pale line. The sealed violet tissue fragment was no longer in the house. It rested in Mr. Holden's locked deed box in Stokesley, its transfer entered in his daybook and its wax unbroken. Damaris knew that fact should have comforted her. Instead, it made the empty space where the fragment had been feel like a promise that now required proof. She stopped near the linen closet. Bess came from the lower stair, she said. Mr. Gresham's office is there. The copying desk stands just inside the door, on the right. Quentin looked toward the narrow office passage, and she said her sleeve caught when she pulled away. Yes. Damaris stood where Bess had likely stood and turned one shoulder toward the office. If Mr. Gresham held the outer cuff, she would have pulled backward. The torn edge could have brushed the copying desk. Mrs. Yates examined the angle. The paper might have caught only if it were damp, or if fresh tissue had been left near the edge. Damaris did not add that either possibility meant carelessness from a man who controlled records too carefully to be careless by accident. Quentin approached the office door but did not enter. A new lock had been fitted after his orders. Gresham held one key. The second key, according to the household register, should have rested in the office strong box, which had not yet been opened because Mr. Holden had advised witnesses be present. Would the press copybook usually remain near the desk? Quentin asked. Yes, Your Grace. Bound in what? Often leather, black or dark brown, large enough to hold a sheet without folding. He absorbed the description. Bran sat directly in front of him, blocking the narrowest part of the passage. Quentin looked down. Am I being examined? Damaris glanced at the hound's solemn face. I believe he's deciding whether Your Grace may be trusted near the evidence. And has he reached a conclusion? Not yet. Bran continued to stare. The corner of Quentin's mouth shifted. Damaris felt a quiet warmth beneath her ribs. Surprising, not because he smiled, but because he allowed her small impertinence to remain unpunished. She looked down before the moment could become too visible. You see, she said, he believes Your Grace may be taught. Mrs. Yates made a sound that might have been a cough. Quentin's smile deepened by a fraction. I shall try not to disappoint him. They completed the route without opening the office. Damaris showed where Bess had turned toward the linen passage, where the cuff might have snagged, and where Gresham could have intercepted her before she reached Mrs. Yates. She was careful to separate what Bess had said from what the marks allowed them to infer. Quentin asked no leading questions. By the time they returned to Mrs. Yates's sitting room, he had written nothing. Yet Damaris sensed he had missed little. Bran settled outside the open door. Mrs. Yates brought the previous 6 months of wage acknowledgments from her locked cabinet and placed them on the table. Quentin remained standing until Damaris and the housekeeper were seated. You recognized the copying tissue before anyone else, he said, because of my mother. Damaris placed her hands in her lap. She had not intended to say more, but the room had become too quiet for evasion, and not yet hostile enough for fear. She was a lady's maid before she married. Her mistress used a copying press for correspondence. Did your mother keep records? She prepared them. The first word came easily. The next did not. Later, she reported silver missing from the household. A gentleman connected to the family had taken it. He was protected. Pressure tightened around Damaris's throat. Quentin did not lean forward. He did not offer the missing phrase. He waited. Bran lowered his head onto his paws. Mrs. Yates's pen remained still. Damaris drew a slow breath. My mother was given a false character. It said she was dishonest and given to spite. She could not find another place. Her voice caught again, but the silence did not turn impatient. She took sewing. Some weeks she was paid in food because people knew she had no choice. Once, a woman kept 2 months of work and said a servant without a character should be grateful for whatever she received. Quentin's face changed, though his posture did not. How old were you? 15 when I entered service. My mother died 3 years later. And the thimble? Hers. Damaris touched the small shape in her work pocket. It was one of the few things the household had not taken back. Quentin looked toward the wage books. A character can decide whether a servant eats. It can decide whether she is believed before she speaks. The sentence left Damaris more sharply than she intended. One line from a person with rank may travel farther than every explanation she gives afterward. Quentin accepted the rebuke without defense. Then this inquiry cannot depend on my belief alone. No. It must depend on records, witnesses, and what can be proved. Yes, Mrs. Yates opened the first acknowledgement book. I could use another pair of eyes. Someone who knows linen charges and can distinguish a genuine advance from an invented one. Quentin looked at Damaris. Would you undertake the work temporarily? She did not answer at once. Assistance requested by a duke could become obedience before a servant had named the cost. Under Mrs. Yates's authority, she said. Not Mr. Gresham's. Agreed. The work is beyond my ordinary duties. You will be paid additionally. Bess keeps her place whether she completes a statement or not. Yes. And no one questions her until she asks to continue. Quentin held her gaze. Agreed. Damaris inclined her head. Then I will do it. They began with the most recent entries. The first pages showed ordinary deductions for boots, aprons, and small advances, each witnessed by Mrs. Yates or a senior servant. Then Damaris found an august acknowledgement for a kitchen maid who had left suddenly. A faint violet transfer mark crossed the lower margin, too pale to be ordinary ink. Beside the amount, in a smaller hand, appeared the code M7. A September entry carried the same mark. So did one from October. 3 women, 3 different households of origin, 3 deductions described as advances, though none bore a clear purpose. Quentin bent over the table without touching the pages. Is that the same violet transfer? It appears similar. And M7? I don't know. Damaris turned back to the August entry. The servant's signature leaned sharply uphill, as if written under strain. But it is not a household account code Mrs. Yates recognizes. The housekeeper shook her head. It isn't mine. Outside the room, footsteps slowed, then moved on. By luncheon, the rumor had already reached the upper servants' hall that Damaris had requested private office work from the Duke, and that Bran guarded the door while she searched a gentleman's papers. Lady Sybil's version travelled even faster. By evening, a visiting maid repeated that Damaris was teaching servants to bargain above their station. Damaris closed the wage book and looked again at the 3 M7 entries. Someone was not merely preparing false characters after servants resisted. Someone was arranging in advance which women would be called troublesome when they did. On the 9th of November, Mr. Holden arrived at Thornbeck Hall with the sealed packet still locked inside his deed box and refused to break the wax merely because curiosity had become urgent. The examination took place in Mrs. Yates's sitting room, where the 3 wage acknowledgement books remained on the table under her supervision. Quentin stood near the hearth. Damaris sat beside the window with a pencil and clean paper, while Bran lay outside the open door, large enough to discourage interruption without having been asked to do so. Mr. Holden placed the deed box on the desk and showed them the packet only long enough to confirm that the wax and signatures were unchanged. The torn tissue may later need to be matched against an exact edge, he said. Opening it now wouldn't give us much we can't learn another way. From his portfolio, he produced a fresh sheet, violet ink, and a square of damp copying tissue. He wrote a single sentence, laid the tissue over it, pressed, and peeled it back. The mirrored words appeared in reversed violet strokes. "This is the method Miss Holt described," he said. "It confirms the material is consistent with a press copy. It doesn't identify the writer." Damaris looked at the sample, then at the sealed packet, and the date. If the fragment truly bears the 2nd of November, and if the words concern Miss Calder, then the accusation was prepared before the conduct alleged against her on the 3rd. Mr. Holden folded the sample away. That would be powerful evidence of design. We're not yet entitled to assume the connection. Quentin glanced toward Damaris. "You said the same." "Because proving too much too soon can weaken what is actually true." Her answer caught slightly on the final word. No one supplied it. Quentin waited until she finished, and the silence remained hers. Mrs. Yates opened the August wage book. "These are the 3 entries we found." Each carried a faint violet transfer mark and the small code M7. Mr. Holden examined them under the lamp. "The discoloration may come from copied ink. The code isn't one I recognize from ordinary household accounts." "Nor is it mine," Mrs. Yates said. "The women named here all left within a month of the entry." "With characters?" Quentin asked. "Each one," Mrs. Yates replied. "Mr. Gresham prepared them." Damaris laid a folded transcription beside the book. A visiting housekeeper had shown Mrs. Yates a county placement circular that morning, but had retained the original. Mrs. Yates had copied its wording and noted the small Marchmont crest at the top. The warning advised caution towards servants accused of dishonest conduct, resistance to proper correction, or encouraging discontent among inferiors. Mr. Holden read the transcription once. The language resembles the fragment and these entries. "It may be common language," Damaris said. "A copied phrase doesn't prove Lady Sybil instructed anyone at Thornbeck." Quentin looked at her rather than the page. Who profits if the same language follows a servant from one household to the next? Damaris considered the question. "Mr. Gresham may enter an advance that was never paid, then threaten a bad character if the servant objects. Lady Sybil's committee decides which houses receive warnings and which women are recommended. Households contribute to the committee. The servant loses wages, work, and the chance to challenge either." Pressure tightened around her throat. She paused. Quentin did not move. He did not look toward Mrs. Yates or Mr. Holden, as if someone more fluent should replace her. Damaris drew breath and continued. "Fear makes the record appear orderly because the person harmed is too frightened to dispute it." Mr. Holden made a note. "That's a theory supported by pattern, not yet proof of conspiracy. Yes, a useful distinction. The door opened before he could continue. Bess stood there, pale but upright, her mended cuff neat against her wrist. "Mrs. Yates, may I speak?" She entered only after the housekeeper invited her. Her eyes went first to Quentin, then to the wage books. "I was wrong about what Mr. Gresham said." Damaris saw the fear before the denial arrived. Which part? He didn't threaten Daniel. Bess's fingers closed around the repaired cuff. "I misunderstood." Mrs. Yates set down her pen. "Has anyone spoken to you since your statement?" "No, ma'am." The answer came too quickly. "Bess," Damaris said, "your place doesn't depend on changing your words. Daniel's does." The whisper escaped before Bess could stop it. Her face emptied. Quentin's voice remained quiet. "What were you told?" Bess looked toward the open door as if Gresham might be standing beyond Bran. "That a stable chisel is missing. Mr. Gresham said Daniel was seen near the locked tack room. He said if I continued making accusations, the tool would be found among Daniel's things." Quentin's expression became still. "Mrs. Yates, Miss Calder, won't be questioned further today. Her earlier statement remains recorded as given. This retraction will be recorded as given too, including the pressure she has now described." He turned to Mr. Holden. "Can the stable matter be examined without alerting whoever devised it?" "Yes, if the inventory is checked first and the servants remain under separate authority." Quentin nodded. "Daniel Calder stays under the stable master. No dismissal, search, wage deduction, or accusation concerning him occurs without the stable master, Mrs. Yates, and a written inventory present. Mr. Gresham isn't to approach either Calder." Bess's breath broke with relief. Damaris did not ask her for courage she could not yet afford. She only said, "You've told enough for today, Mr." Holden copied the 3M7 references into his notes, returned the wage books to Mrs. Yates, and watched her lock them in the cabinet. He departed with the sealed tissue packet still unopened in his deed box. The visiting housekeeper's original circular had never entered Thornbeck's custody, and Mrs. Yates kept only her transcription. By dusk, Gresham had learned that Daniel had been placed beyond his reach and that the copying method had been recognized. He entered his office by the private stair, locked the outer door, and opened the lowest drawer of the copying desk. The black Morocco press copybook lay beneath 2 bundles of household correspondence. He wrapped it in brown cloth and placed it inside a locked records case. Tom Rigg, a stable boy too young to question a secretary's order, carried the case through the disused western passage toward the old coach house. "Discarded accounts," Gresham told him. "They'll be sorted for burning later." Tom left the case beside the harness room door and went back for a second lamp. Before he returned, Gresham dragged the case inside and dismissed him. Bran watched from the shadow of the coach bay. He did not bark. He followed the scent of old leather and pale straw through the western passage, then returned to the servants' corridor before supper. Damaris found him waiting outside the linen room, with bits of dry straw along his back. She brushed one piece free and smelled old harness leather on his coat. "Where have you been?" Bran turned his head toward the west. Above stairs, Lady Sybil was already telling a visiting rector's wife that Miss Holt had begun teaching servants to bargain with their employers and had persuaded the Duke to shelter insolence. Damaris looked from the straw in her hand to the dark western passage. Someone was moving the truth while society was being taught not to trust the woman who might find it. On the 12th of November, Damaris Holt was summoned to the morning room at Thornbeck Hall and knew before Enchied. that Lady Sybil Marchmont intended to make obedience look like guilt. Mrs. Yates stood near the writing table with the household duty book open before her. Quentin Kenwood waited by the tall windows, his expression unreadable. Lady Sybil sat beside the fire in a dark plum gown, one gloved hand resting on the arm of her chair. Bran lay in the corridor beyond the open door, his great head turned toward Damaris. "Miss Holt," Lady Sybil began, "you perform night duties in the Western Service passages." "Yes, my lady. Passages near His Grace's private apartments. Some passages connect to the upper floors. That was not my question." Damaris felt the first pressure tightened in her throat. "I don't enter His Grace's private rooms." Lady Sybil's gaze moved to Quentin, yet the Duke's hound follows her wherever she goes. "Guests have remarked upon it." "Guests remark upon many things when conversation fails them," Quentin said. "The animal's preference does not alter Miss Holt's assigned duties. You make this sound trivial. You are attempting to make it indecent." Lady Sybil's mouth thinned. "I am protecting Thornbeck from talk. By beginning the talk yourself and then offering protection from it?" Quentin asked. Mrs. Yates lowered her eyes to the duty book, but Damaris saw the faint movement at the corner of her mouth. Lady Sybil turned back to Damaris. "Have you ever been instructed to enter His Grace's bedchamber, dressing room, library, or private study after dark?" "No, my lady." "Have you entered them without instruction?" "No." "Have you lingered near the private staircase?" "Only when my linen route required it." Lady Sybil leaned forward. "And who altered that route after His Grace began noticing you?" Mrs. Yates answered before Damaris could. "I assigned every route in this house, my lady. Miss Holt has not changed one without my order." "How convenient." Quentin's voice hardened. "Enough, Miss Holt has answered. Mrs. Yates's records confirm her duties. This matter is finished." Lady Sybil rose with smooth control. "A duke may end a conversation, Quentin. He cannot end what society sees. Society sees what people like you train it to see." For one instant, something colder than irritation passed through Lady Sybil's face. Then she inclined her head. "You may find indulgence expensive. I have found intimidation more so." She left without looking again at Damaris. Bran did not move as Lady Sybil passed him, though she gave the hound a wider berth than the corridor required. Mrs. Yates entered Damaris's route and duties into the book in full, then signed beneath the date. "There will be no question later about where you were assigned," she said. "Thank you." Damaris reached for the edge of her apron pocket. Her mother's dented silver thimble slipped free, struck the carpet, and rolled beneath the side table. Quentin bent before she could. He retrieved it between two fingers and held it beneath the window light. The silver was darkened from years of use, flattened slightly on one side where it had been dropped long ago. "This belonged to your mother," he said. "Yes, Your Grace. You said it was one of the few things not taken back." Damaris nodded. "She used it for alterations after she lost her place. Later, she used it for everything, including work people did not always pay for." "Yes." Quentin turned the thimble once in his palm. "Did she say anything about mending?" The question surprised Damaris with its gentleness. She said, "A torn thing should be mended before someone profits from the tear." Mrs. Yates glanced toward the open door, then closed the duty book. "I should see whether the linen count has been returned." She did not shut the door when she left. Bran remained visible in the corridor, and footsteps passed at intervals beyond him. The propriety of the room was preserved, yet the silence changed when only Damaris and Quentin remained within it. He looked down at the thimble. When my father died, every steward, creditor, tenant, and relation wanted an answer from me before I had understood the question. Damaris said nothing. Quentin continued, more slowly than she had ever heard him speak. There were debts hidden inside respectable accounts. Promises made to men who assumed a new duke would honor them without reading. I learned to issue orders before anyone could see uncertainty. His fingers closed lightly around the thimble. It was useful. The estates stabilized. People called me decisive. And you believed them. I needed to. He met her eyes. Orders became easier than uncertainty. If a room was quiet after I spoke, I mistook that quiet for safety. Damaris felt the weight of what he was giving her. Not a confession designed to excuse him, but an admission of habit. An order can stop a wrong action, she said. It can't explain why the wrong was possible. Her voice tightened on possible. Quentin waited. She continued, if people learn that obedience is the only proof of innocence, the room may become quiet. No one inside it will be safe enough to speak. The words hung between them. Quentin did not rush to answer. His gaze remained on her face, not on Bran, not on the thimble, not on the doorway through which rank might return and rescue him from discomfort. You have been quiet in rooms that did not deserve your silence, he said. Damaris's breath caught. Quiet does not mean empty. No. The single word held recognition rather than pity. He opened his hand, revealing the thimble. May I? She understood that he was not asking permission merely to return an object. He was asking whether he could close the distance he had left between them. Damaris opened her palm. Quentin placed the thimble at its center. His fingers rested beneath hers for one heartbeat, warm against her skin, then curved gently over the back of her hand until her own fingers closed around the silver. The touch was deliberate and restrained. Damaris did not withdraw. Something moved through his expression, quiet and unguarded, before he released her first. Thank you, he said. For what? For showing me the difference between silence and peace. Damaris looked at the thimble enclosed in her hand. The difference only matters if you remember it when the room becomes difficult. Quentin's gaze sharpened, as if he understood that she had not offered praise. She had given him a test. Then I will have to remember. Bran rose in the corridor and looked west. Damaris followed his attention, thinking of pale straw, old harness leather, and the black book no one had yet found. Across Thornbeck, beneath the private stair behind the household secretary's office, Lady Sybil entered without being announced. Isaac Gresham had cleared his desk of ordinary papers. The black Morocco press copybook was no longer there. It remained hidden inside the locked records case in the old coach house, wrapped in brown cloth, and buried beneath discarded account files. On the desk lay 3 old servant references and 1 fresh sheet of cream paper. Use language the county will believe, Lady Sybil said. Not accusation. Concern. Gresham dipped his pen. Improper familiarity. From a former household. It must sound established, not newly invented. He wrote the phrase. Encouraging dissatisfaction among junior servants. Better. She has already given that appearance. Seeking access to private rooms beyond her duties, Lady Sybil considered. Yes, that will make the hound useful without making the animal itself the charge. Gresham looked up. If His Grace disputes it. Then he confirms that he has taken a personal interest in defending her. She walked to the window overlooking the service court. Reputation travels faster than correction. By the time he proves the paper false, half the county will have decided why he cared. And the copy? Enter it in the book after we recover it. The book is safe. It had better be. Gresham finished the false character, copying phrases from references old enough that their writers were unlikely to remember every line. Lady Sybil read the page once, then folded it beneath the supper program for the annual servants' benefit gathering. At the supper, she said, let the county hear what sort of woman the hound has chosen. On the 15th of November, Bess Calder asked to make a formal statement and discovered that courage did not become easier, merely because a room had been made safe for it. She sat near the fire in Mrs. Yates's private sitting room with both hands closed around the cuff Damaris had repaired 12 days earlier. The redness at her wrist had almost vanished. The fear had not. Mrs. Yates waited at the writing desk with a clean sheet of paper before her. A clerk from Mr. Holden's office sat in the adjoining room, close enough to witness any completed statement, but far enough that Bess did not feel surrounded. Quentin Kenwood occupied the chair farthest from her, his hands visible upon the arms. Damaris stood beside the hearth. Bran lay across the open threshold, his immense body forming a quiet boundary no one had ordered him to make. You ask to speak, Mrs. Yates said. You may stop whenever you choose. Bess nodded. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked once toward Quentin, then lowered her eyes so quickly that the movement revealed more than speech might have done. Quentin noticed. Would you prefer that I leave? He asked. Bess looked helplessly at Damaris. The Duke had given her a choice, but fear had not yet taught her how to use it. Damaris stepped nearer without touching her. His Grace may stay if you wish, she said, but he mustn't question you directly unless you ask him to. Quentin's gaze met hers. He did not defend the right rank usually assumed. Then I won't. He leaned back, placing more distance between himself and Bess. Mrs. Yates dipped her pen, but did not lower it to the page. Bess swallowed. Mr. Gresham said I would leave without a character. The housekeeper waited until the next words came. He said no respectable house would take a girl who refused correction, he said. Lady Sybil knew which housekeepers asked questions and which ones followed recommendations. Did he mention the blank acknowledgement? Mrs. Yates asked. Yes, he said, if I signed it, the matter would be forgotten. What matter? Damaris asked gently. The wine glasses, the scorched linen, things I didn't damage. Bess's fingers tightened around the repaired seam. And Daniel. Mr. Gresham said a stable tool could be found wherever he wished it found. Quentin's jaw hardened. He remained silent. Damaris heard the restraint as clearly as another person might have heard an order. Did he show you an inventory of missing tools? She asked. No. Did he name a witness who had seen Daniel take anything? No. Bess looked toward the open doorway. Bran raised his head but did not enter. He only said proof could be arranged for people who demanded too much of it. Mrs. Yates wrote the exact sentence. The cruelty of the phrase lay in how little force it required. A servant did not need to be convicted. She needed only to be made uncertain of her next wage, her next bed, and the character that would determine whether another household opened its door. Bess drew a shallow breath. There is something else. Damaris waited. 3 days ago, I carried correspondence to Mr. Gresham's office. He had left a paper on the desk. What kind of paper? Cream paper. A character, I think. Bess's eyes filled with shame. It had Miss Holt's name near the top. The room changed. Quentin leaned forward, then checked the movement and settled back. Damaris felt the pressure of every unasked question. Did you read it? She asked. Only a few words. I shouldn't have looked. You did nothing wrong by seeing what had been left before you. Damaris kept her voice even. Which words? Bess rubbed her thumb against the cuff. Improper familiarity, encouraging discontent, and something about private rooms. Quentin's fingers closed once around the carved arm of his chair. He did not speak. "Are you certain it was my name?" Damaris asked. "Yes." Bess's breath broke. "I wanted to tell you, but Mr. Gresham came back. He saw me looking toward the desk. Later, he said, Daniel would be charged with taking a chisel if I repeated anything I'd seen." Mrs. Yates laid down her pen. "You have repeated it now." "Not all of it." Bess shook her head. "I can't remember the rest." "Then don't invent what you cannot remember," Damaris said. "What you know is enough for today." Bess stared at her. "But if I don't speak at the supper, they'll say I lied. Your fear is not evidence against me." Damaris held the girl's gaze. "And my name is not worth saving by forcing yours into danger." Tears spilled then, quietly and without spectacle. Mrs. Yates rose and led Bess into the adjoining room. The unfinished statement remained on the desk, containing only the words Bess had freely given. Quentin did not ask for more. Should the servants' benefit supper be cancelled? He asked after the door had closed. Damaris looked at the blank portion of Bess's statement. "No. Lady Sybil intends to use the gathering. Then, cancelling it will become another story she controls. You shouldn't have to stand before a hostile room to answer a document that has not been examined. No woman should." Damaris felt the stammer gather and pressed on before it could become shame. "But if the paper is read there, it must be answered there. Otherwise, the last thing the county remembers will be the accusation." Quentin studied her. "Do you want me to answer it?" The question carried no command, but the possibility of one. "No." "Then what do you want from me?" "Make certain I am allowed to finish." He held her gaze. "I will." Damaris heard the promise and understood why it frightened her. It was easy to offer in a quiet room. Its true weight would be measured only when his household, reputation, and authority were pressed against it. After the interview, she crossed the west cloister alone. Cold daylight fell through the narrow arches and divided the stone floor into strips of grey. Her composure lasted until she reached the old chapel door. Then her hands began to shake. She pressed them against her skirt, but the tremor travelled into her arms. "Miss Holt." Quentin's voice came from behind her. She turned. He stood several paces away. Bran moved at his side, silent and watchful. "I'm quite well, Your Grace." The lie sounded thin even to her. Quentin did not expose it. "Would you prefer to be alone?" "I don't know." The answer escaped before dignity could repair it. He considered that uncertainty with more care than most men gave certainty. Then he extended one hand, palm upward, and did not move closer. "Will you let me stand with you?" Damaris looked at the offered hand. 3 days earlier, he had asked permission to return her mother's thimble. This was different. He was asking whether she would choose contact with him when fear had made her body unsteady. Bran came between them and leaned one broadside against Damaris's skirts. His other shoulder rested against Quentin's knee, joining them without trapping either. The quiet absurdity of it almost made her smile. Instead, it made breathing possible. Damaris placed her hand in Quentin's. His fingers closed gently around hers. He did not draw her nearer. He did not turn the reassurance into possession. They remained that way through several slow breaths. Warmth moved through her glove and steadied what words could not. "At the supper," Quentin said, "I won't answer for you." Damaris looked up. "A promise made here is easy." "Yes." His thumb shifted once across the back of her hand, then stilled. "It becomes real only when the room turns against me," she said. "When defending your house seems easier than waiting for me." then judge me there." The words held no pride. They gave her the right to measure him by what he did next. Damaris released his hand first. Quentin let his fall without trying to prolong the moment. Bran remained pressed between them. "You're trembling less," Quentin said. Damaris glanced down at the hound. "Bran deserves most of the credit. Naturally, he still believes your grace may be taught." A faint warmth entered Quentin's eyes. "I am beginning to understand the severity of his standards." That evening, Lady Sybil rearranged the seating plan for the servants' benefit supper. Damaris's place was moved from the linen maid's table to the central aisle, directly within sight of the Duke's chair. In Gresham's office, the false character lay folded beneath the printed programme. Bess was summoned after dusk. Gresham pointed to a penciled note bearing Daniel Calder's name and the words "missing stable chisel." "One word from you at the supper," he said, "and your brother leaves Thornbeck under suspicion before the lamps burn low." Bess left without answering. At the corridor turn, she saw Damaris approaching with Bran beside her. The warning rose to her lips. Then she remembered Daniel's winter wages, his bed in the lower stable, and the road beyond Thornbeck's gates. Bess lowered her eyes and passed in silence, while somewhere above them, Lady Sybil prepared a room in which Quentin's promise would become either truth or another form of control. On the evening of the 18th of November, the old riding school at Thornbeck Hall was dressed for benevolence and arranged for judgment. Evergreen branches softened the timber walls. Lamps burned above long tables laid for the annual servants' benefit supper. County families sat beside clergymen, senior housekeepers, stewards, and household officers who had subscribed to the winter fund. The room appeared charitable until Damaris saw where Lady Sybil had placed her. Her chair stood beside the central aisle, separated from the linen maids, and directly within sight of Quentin Kenwood's place beneath the Kenwood Arms. Bran settled beside her skirts, immense and silent. A lady near the gallery drew her chair several inches away from the aisle. A visiting housekeeper glanced at the hound, then closed the notebook in which she had been recording the names of promising servants. At the rear doors, Daniel Calder stood among the lower stable men. Bess sat near Mrs. Yates with her repaired cuff hidden beneath one hand. Isaac Gresham occupied a chair beside Lady Sybil. The folded supper programme before him concealed the cream paper Bess had glimpsed in his office. Damaris looked toward Quentin. He met her eyes. She remembered the warmth of his hand in the west cloister and the promise he had given without rank between them. He would not answer for her. He would make certain she was allowed to finish. The meal passed beneath speeches about duty, discipline, and Christian care. When the final plates had been removed, Quentin rose to thank the subscribers. Lady Sybil stood before he could dismiss the gathering. "Your Grace, there is a matter that must be addressed before this committee recommends any servant or distributes further relief." Quentin remained standing. This gathering was not called for private accusations. The matter concerns the integrity of the house hosting us. Lady Sybil lifted the folded cream paper. Silence would expose respectable households to a servant whose history has been concealed. The room quieted. Damaris felt Bran's shoulder touch the hem of her dress. Quentin's voice cooled. "State the charge plainly." "I shall read the character supplied from Miss Holt's former place." The word character moved through the servants' tables like cold air. Lady Sybil unfolded the page. Damaris Holt. Dismissed after improper familiarity with a gentleman of the household. known to encourage discontent among junior servants, repeatedly sought access to private family rooms beyond the requirements of her station. Not recommended where modesty, discretion, or obedience are expected. No one spoke for one heartbeat. Then whispers began. The words found one another quickly. Private rooms, a duke's attention, a hound that followed a maid through passages after dark. Lady Sybil allowed the meaning to spread before she continued. We have all observed the unusual liberty Miss Holt enjoys at Thornbeck. His Grace's animal follows her through corridors where ordinary servants have no reason to attract notice. One may reasonably ask whether the attachment began before or after. She discovered how useful the Duke's concern could be. A woman near the gallery lifted her fan. The visiting housekeeper moved her closed notebook off the table as if Damaris's name might stain it. One of the footmen, who had accepted folded linen from Damaris every week for 4 years, looked at the floor. Bess began to rise. Gresham turned his head toward Daniel. He did not gesture. He only looked. Bess saw the missing chisel written beside her brother's name and sank back onto the bench. Damaris stood. Bran rose with her. That document is false. The first sentence carried through the room. The second caught behind the pressure in her throat. I was not depisted for. Someone whispered. She cannot even deny it. Quentin's hand closed around the back of his chair. Damaris drew breath. Do not rescue me, she thought. Wait. Lady Sybil tilted her head with practiced concern. Take your time, Miss Holt. We are all prepared to hear how an innocent woman explains such a history. Damaris fixed her gaze on a point beyond the lamps. I have never served in a household where I was accused of improper. Enough. Quentin's voice silenced the room. He stepped forward. I will answer for Miss Holt. Relief passed across several faces. The Duke would decide. The discomfort would end. No one would need to wait through Damaris's difficult words. Quentin continued. Until the document has been examined, Miss Holt is suspended from her temporary record duties. She will remain under Mrs. Yates's protection, and no adverse character will be issued from Thornbeck. Lady Sybil lowered the paper with a small, satisfied breath. A prudent decision, Your Grace. Damaris looked at Quentin. The room seemed to narrow around the space between them. Protection? He turned toward her, and certainty left his face. She forced the next words through the pressure. You promised to stand with me. No one moved. You have stood where my voice should be. Quentin's expression changed as if the accusation had struck somewhere no public insult could reach. Miss Holt, I intended. I know what you intended. Her voice was uneven but audible. You intended to stop them from hurting me. Instead, you showed them they did not have to hear me. The silence that followed was not kind, but it belonged to her. Damaris turned toward Lady Sybil. I have never been dismissed for improper conduct. I have never entered His Grace's private rooms. My night route was assigned by Mrs. Yates and recorded in the household duty book. Mrs. Yates rose. That is correct. I accepted temporary record work only under her authority. Damaris continued. Bess Calder was not to be questioned against her will, and her place was not to depend upon completing a statement. Bess covered her mouth. Damaris did not call her forward. A document bearing my name was seen on Mr. Gresham's desk 3 days before this supper. The violet tissue fragment found in Bess Calder's torn cuff remains sealed in Mr. Holden's deed box. Its partial date appears to precede the conduct used against her. 3 wage entries carry the same violet transfer mark and the code M7. These facts do not yet prove who wrote the paper Lady Sybil has read. They do prove the inquiry began before she chose this room for an accusation. Gresham stood. This is gross insubordination. No, Mrs. Yates said. It is a statement of matters recorded under my supervision. She stepped into the aisle and held out her hand. Lady Sybil, I require the document. Lady Sybil stared at her. You forget yourself. I remember my duty. Quentin spoke, but this time only after Damaris had finished. Give Mrs. Yates the paper. Lady Sybil surrendered it. Mrs. Yates brought a clean envelope from the subscription table. Before the rector and the visiting magistrate, she placed the false character inside, sealed it with wax, and asked both men to sign across the fold. The rector entered the document in the subscription book with the time and names of those present. Mrs. Yates would send it under receipt to Mr. Holden for entry in his daybook. Neither Lady Sybil nor Gresham could alter or reclaim it. Damaris went to Mrs. Yates and held out the temporary ledger. I return this duty to you. The housekeeper did not take it. You have not been dismissed. No, I am resigning. Quentin came down from the head table, but stopped several feet away. Do not decide while this room is hostile. This room was made hostile before I entered it. Damaris looked at him. I stayed because you promised I would not have to surrender my voice to be safe. His face held no defense now. I failed you. Yes, the answer cost her, but truth required no softening. If I remain under suspension, they will learn that a powerful man may take a woman's choice, call it protection, and expect gratitude. What will you do? Leave Thornbeck in the morning, Mrs. Yates may examine my room. I will give my aunt's direction in Stokesley. Quentin's hands remained at his sides. You will receive full wages, the additional payment for your record work, and a truthful statement of service. Those are owed, not favours. Agreed. Damaris placed the ledger in Mrs. Yates's hands and walked toward the rear doors. Bran followed, passing titled guests and servants without turning his head. At the threshold, Damaris knelt and rested one hand against the thick fur at his neck. Stay! Bran looked at her. He still has something to learn. She rose. The hound took one step after her. Damaris shook her head. Stay with Quentin. It was the first time she had used the Duke's Christian name, and only Bran stood close enough to hear it clearly. The hound remained between them as Damaris left alone. Before dawn, she packed her work dresses, her mother's dented silver thimble, and nothing that belonged to Thornbeck. Mrs. Yates joined her in the enclosed carriage. Bran waited inside the service gate. Quentin stood several paces behind him without hat or coat, as though he had come too quickly to remember the cold. Damaris entered the carriage. He did not order her to remain. He did not ask forgiveness while she still depended upon his house. As the wheels turned toward Stokesley, Bran stayed at the gate, and Quentin stood beside him, watching the woman he had tried to protect leave, because he had not yet learned that listening mattered most when every instinct told him to speak. By noon on the 19th of November, Thornbeck Hall had disappeared behind wet hedges and grey fields. Yet Damaris could still see the service gate whenever she closed her eyes. Bran had remained inside it. Quentin had stood behind him without hat or coat. Neither had followed. Mrs. Yates sat opposite Damaris in the enclosed carriage with a square leather case resting on her knees. Rain slid across the windows, blurring the road towards Stokesley. For nearly an hour, the housekeeper said nothing. Then she opened the case. His Grace ordered every sum entered before we left. She placed a folded account in Damaris's lap. Your ordinary wages, the additional payment for examining the acknowledgement books. 2 days in lieu of notice. Damaris read each figure. Nothing had been rounded in the household's favor. I resigned. You resigned because the household failed you. That does not release the household from what it owes. Mrs. Yates removed a second document. It bore the Kenwood seal and Quentin's signature beneath Mr. Holden's witnessing hand. Miss Damaris Holt had left Thornbeck Hall of her own decision after serving honorably and without proven misconduct. The statement praised her diligence, needlework, literacy, and care toward junior servants. It did not call her innocent because a duke felt protective. It recorded what she had actually done. "He wrote this before dawn?" Damaris asked. "Before I ordered the carriage. It does not erase last night?" "No." Mrs. Yates met her eyes. "He did not ask me to say it did, Mrs. Edith Holt lived above a milliner's shop near Stokesley's Market Cross. She was 54, widowed, and possessed the same narrow hands Damaris remembered from her mother. When she opened the door and saw the trunk, Mrs. Yates and Damaris's face, she asked no question in the passage. Come inside before the cold begins deciding things for us." In the small front parlor, Mrs. Yates explained that Damaris had not been dismissed, that her wages were complete, and that no adverse character had been issued from Thornbeck. She did not conceal the riding school humiliation. Edith listened with one hand on the back of a chair, and the Duke let her leave. He did not prevent her. Good. Edith's answer was not kind, but it was just. A man who has taken a woman's choice once does not repair it by taking another. Mrs. Yates inclined her head. Before departing, she promised that any household news would come through Mr. Holden or herself, never through Gresham. She left the leather case, the statement, and Damaris's freedom to decide what happened next. Distance did not bring peace. It brought enough silence for anger to become exact. Damaris was angry with Lady Sybil for making cruelty sound respectable. She was angry with Gresham for turning paper into hunger. She was angry with the room that had preferred a duke's certainty to her unfinished words. Most painfully, she was angry with Quentin, because his failure had reached a place in her that indifference never could have touched. On the morning of the 20th, she refused to remain seated beneath it. Edith knew 3 women who had passed through Stokesley after losing domestic places in neighbouring houses. Martha Bell worked behind a baker's shop. Nell Foster took in washing near the parish lane. Eliza Pike lived with a widowed sister and had once served as a lady's maid. Damaris visited them with Edith beside her. She promised no position, no ducal favour, and no revenge. She asked only what had happened and waited for each answer. Martha Bell received them in a warm back room that smelled of flour and yeast. She was 32, though exhaustion had placed older lines around her mouth. From the bottom of a tea tin she removed a folded wage stub, worn soft at the creases. "They wrote £1 and 8 shillings for a uniform," she said. "I received 6 shillings and supplied my own apron." Beside the amount appeared the small code M7. "What happened when you questioned it?" Damaris asked. Martha looked toward the oven door. "Mr. Gresham said Lady Sybil's committee would mark me difficult. A month later, I took my trunk to a house outside Northallerton. The housekeeper read my character on the step and closed the servant's door before I could explain." Her voice remained calm. That calmness made the picture harsher. I had paid for 2 nights at an inn. I sold my boots for the 3rd, walked here in borrowed shoes. Damaris looked at the cracked leather now beneath Martha's skirt. Her mother had once sewn through winter for food, because a single household had written dishonesty where courage should have stood. Martha's suffering belonged to the same machinery. May I copy the amount, wording, and code? Damaris asked. The original remains yours. Martha studied her. The Duke won't take it, not unless you choose to place it with his solicitor, and not without a signed receipt. Martha handed over the stub long enough for Damaris to copy it, then returned it to the tea tin. Nell Foster's paper recorded £2 for medical expenses, supposedly advanced after her mother's death. Her mother had still been alive on the date written. Nell had objected and received a character describing her as resentful under correction. Her stub also carried M7. She allowed Damaris to copy it, but kept the original inside a prayer book. Eliza Pike's evidence was more deliberate. She brought out an original stub marked M7 and a county placement circular bearing the Marchmont crest. The printed warning advised households to avoid servants associated with dishonest conduct, resistance to proper correction, or the encouragement of discontent. Lady Sybil's secretary sent this after I refused to pay for a recommendation, Eliza said. Mr. Gresham had already taken part of my first wages. He said the money secured a good character. When I asked for it back, 3 households refused me within a fortnight. Damaris read the circular, but did not remove it from Eliza's table. This proves the wording circulated under Marchmont authority, she said. It does not yet prove Lady Sybil ordered false entries at Thornbeck. You are careful with blame, Eliza observed. I know what careless blame can cost. Damaris copied the crest, phrases, and date. Keep the original. Halden examines it later. He must give you a receipt before it leaves your hand. By late afternoon, Edith's parlour table held 3 copied wage entries. Different women, different sums, the same violet-associated language, the same code, M7. A knock sounded below. The milliner's apprentice brought up 2 letters. The first bore Mrs. Yates's hand. The black morocco press copybook was missing from Gresham's office. His drawers had been examined before witnesses after Mr. Halden arrived. The book was not there. Mrs. Yates added that Gresham no longer possessed authority to issue, alter, or store any female servant character. Every such paper now required her direct custody. The second letter carried the Kenwood seal, but inside was a copy of a notice. Quentin had sent to every household known to have received Lady Sybil's warning. No adverse character against Miss Damaris Holt had been established. Any document alleging dismissal for improper conduct was disputed and must not be relied upon. Miss Holt had served Thornbeck honourably. Quentin had issued the correction before the missing book was recovered, before the torn tissue was matched, and before Damaris had forgiven him. A smaller note in his own hand lay beneath it. I will not ask you to return. I have begun correcting what I allowed to be said in my house. Mr. Halden will keep every document in his deed box. Mrs. Yates now holds authority over female servant characters. If you permit it, I will call formally tomorrow, not to defend myself, but to hear the terms on which truth may proceed. Damaris read the note twice. Edith watched from beside the fire. Do you believe him? Damaris looked at Quentin's correction, Martha's copied account, Nell's false debt, Eliza's Marchmont circular, and the 3 identical marks beside their names. I believe he is changing what he does. She placed the copied entries side by side. M7 appeared in precisely the same position on each. The women had not been punished at random. Someone had placed them on the same list before each lost wages, employment, or the right to be believed. Outside, evening bells marked the hour. At Thornbeck, the black morocco book remained hidden somewhere beyond the office. In Stokesley, Damaris touched the 3 codes with one finger and understood that she was no longer searching for isolated cruelty. She was looking for the list that had taught cruelty whom to choose. On the 21st of November, Quentin Kenwood arrived at Mrs. Edith Holt's rooms in Stokesley without flowers, without bran, and without any object that might turn an apology into a bargain. His closed carriage stopped before the milliner's shop shortly after 10. Mrs. Yates arrived in a second carriage moments later, carrying a narrow leather portfolio beneath one arm. Edith received them in the small front parlour above the shop, where the door remained open, and the ordinary sounds below made secrecy impossible. Scissors opened and closed against cloth. A customer asked for blue ribbon. Somewhere near the back stair, the milliner's apprentice laughed and was immediately hushed. Damaris sat beside the coal fire in a plain brown dress, with her mother's dented silver thimble resting in her work pocket. The 3 copied M7 entries lay inside Edith's locked desk. Martha Bell, Nell Foster, and Eliza Pike still possessed their original wage stubs. Eliza also retained the original Marchmont circular bearing the general warning against servants who resisted proper correction. No document belonging to those women had entered Quentin's hands. He bowed first to Edith, then to Damaris. "Thank you for allowing me to call." "My aunt allowed the call," Damaris said. "I agreed to hear you." The distinction reached him. "Yes." Mrs. Yates chose the chair nearest the open door. Edith sat beside the window with a basket of unfinished trimming in her lap. Quentin remained standing until the women had settled, then took the smallest chair in the room rather than the place nearest the fire. He placed no papers on the table. For several seconds, no one spoke. The silence was not comfortable, but Quentin did not rush to escape it. "I broke my promise to you," he said. "You told me it would matter only when the room turned against you. When that happened, I answered for you." Damaris kept her hands folded. "Yes, I called the suspension protection. It wasn't." His voice remained controlled, but there was nothing polished in the admission. "I decided what safety should look like without asking what you chose. I used my rank so the room could stop waiting for you. Then I expected the fact that I meant well to make the harm smaller." He looked at her directly. It didn't. Damaris felt pressure gather behind her first response. She allowed the pause to remain. Quentin did not lean forward. He did not rescue the sentence. "You stopped Lady Sybil from issuing an immediate household dismissal," she said at last. "That doesn't erase the rest. No, you made it possible for everyone there to believe I required a duke's voice because mine was insufficient. Yes, and you took the choice after promising to preserve it. Yes, the absence of defense unsettled her more than an excuse might have done." Edith's needle moved through a strip of black velvet. Mrs. Yates looked down at her gloves. Quentin continued. "You once said Bran believed I might be taught. I gave you reason to doubt it." The memory of the hound standing between them in the west cloister came with a warmth. Damaris did not welcome and could not deny. Learning is not proved by knowing what you should have done afterward. No, it is proved by what I do next. Why are you here, then? To apologize without asking forgiveness as payment. To ask what conditions must govern the inquiry if you choose to continue. Not to ask you to return to my service. And not to offer marriage as evidence that the accusation was false. The words entered the room with more force than Damaris intended. Something shifted in Quentin's face. He did not look away. "No, your character must stand without my affection, my name, or any future request I may wish to make." Edith's needle paused, then resumed. Damaris studied him. Do you believe the character Lady Sybil read was forged? Yes, the black Morocco copybook is missing. Yes, the violet fragment remains sealed. Yes, the 3 women in Stokesley have not surrendered their original stubs. No. Then, what do you believe? Quentin answered without looking toward Mrs. Yates for support. I believe you were not dismissed for improper familiarity. I believe Mr. Gresham prepared an accusation against Bess Calder before the conduct he claimed to punish. I believe he threatened Daniel because fear was more useful than proof. I believe Lady Sybil intended the public reading to destroy your credibility before the missing records could be found. I also believe that waiting for every page before correcting your character would repeat the wrong. Damaris's anger did not vanish. It changed shape. He had restored her service record while belief still carried social risk for him and no reward from her. That mattered. It did not absolve him. Belief will not protect Martha Bell, Nell Foster, or Eliza Pike, she said. No, their documents remain theirs. Yes, if they choose to place the originals with Mr. Holden, he must issue a separate signed receipt to each woman. No stub is to become ducal property. Agreed. The torn violet fragment stays in Mr. Holden's locked deed box. The false character, read at the supper, remains in its separate sealed packet. Neither is opened except before named witnesses. Agreed. If the black Morocco book is recovered, no one at Thornbeck opens it first. Not you, not Mrs. Yates, not the steward. Agreed. The women choose whether they speak and in what order. Their refusal will not be treated as proof against anyone. Agreed. Damaris drew breath before the next condition. You will not announce a courtship, hint at an engagement, or allow anyone to claim your affection proves my innocence. Quentin's hands tightened once upon his knees. Agreed. His voice lowered. I would like, one day, to ask whether I may court you. I won't ask before your name has been cleared independently of mine, and I won't ask if you do not wish to hear it. Damaris felt the room alter around the unspoken tenderness of the admission. He had not made it a demand. He had not hidden it behind duty. At any public accounting, she continued, you speak after me, yes, even if my stammer worsens. Yes, even if the room turns cruel. Quentin held her gaze. Especially then. She looked toward Mrs. Yates. All female servant characters at Thornbeck remain under your sole authority during the inquiry. Mrs. Yates straightened. Quentin said, the order has already been entered in the household book. It will remain unless Mrs. Yates herself requests another arrangement. I won't, the housekeeper said. Damaris returned her attention to Quentin. Those are my terms. Then those are the terms. He did not negotiate a single one. Edith rose and crossed to the locked desk. Mrs. Yates, there is another matter. She withdrew Damaris's copied notes, but not the originals, which remained with their owners. Mrs. Yates examined the 3 M7 entries. Tom Rigg came to me yesterday, she said. He is the stable boy who carried a locked records case for Mr. Gresham on the 9th. Damaris's pulse sharpened. Where did he take it? Through the disused western passage toward the old coach house. Mr. Gresham said it contained discarded accounts. Tom left it beside the harness room door, went for another lamp, and returned to find the case gone. Quentin leaned forward, then checked himself before the movement became interruption. Mrs. Yates also told me Bran has spent much of the past 2 days facing the western passage, he said. The veterinary surgeon found nothing wrong with him. Damaris remembered pale straw along Bran's back and old harness leather in his coat. He came from that direction on the 9th. "Why did you not say so before?" Quentin asked. There was no accusation in the question, because a hound carrying straw proves only that a hound walked through straw. Damaris touched the copied M7 entries, but Tom Rigg proves a human being moved a locked case. Mrs. Yates nodded. The old coach house has 2 usable approaches, a covered route from the service court and a narrow rear passage beside the unused tack bay. "Is the harness room kept locked?" Damaris asked. "The outer door is. The inner spring latch is unreliable," Quentin said. "Mr. Haldon can meet us there the day after tomorrow on the 23rd. I will station estate men at the outer gates, but no one will enter or move anything until you and Mrs. Yates arrive." Damaris looked at him. "I will not return as a servant. No, I will travel with Mrs. Yates. I will not enter Gresham's office, the coach house, or any locked room alone." "Agreed. Mr. Holden opens any recovered case. Every movement is entered in his daybook." "Yes, and if Gresham attempts to leave, the estate gates will be closed before he is warned. He will not be harmed. If records are found in his possession, the local justice will be summoned." Damaris considered the Black Book, the 3 women who still guarded their originals, and the hound who had returned smelling of the place where truth might have been hidden. Going back to Thornbeck meant entering the estate that had watched her humiliation. It did not mean surrendering to it. "Then I will return on the 23rd, she said. Quentin rose only after she had made the decision. At the parlour door, he paused, but did not move closer. Damaris. It was the first time he had spoken her Christian name directly. "I believe you." The words no longer felt like rescue. They felt like a position he had chosen before certainty became safe. Damaris met his eyes. "Then show me you can trust the way I choose to prove it." The enclosed carriage from Stokesley reached Thornbeck shortly before noon on the 23rd of November, after rain had turned the estate roads dark and deeply rutted. Damaris sat beside Mrs. Yates, with her mother's dented silver thimble in her pocket and the terms agreed in Edith Holt's parlour fixed clearly in her mind. She was not returning as a servant. She had come because 3 women still kept their original wage stubs, because a torn violet fragment remained sealed in Mr. Haldon's deed box, and because the black Morocco press copybook might contain the list that had taught cruelty whom to choose. The carriage passed beneath the service arch and stopped in an empty court. No servants had been assembled to watch. No one offered welcome as if her return were forgiveness. Quentin stood near the covered walk in a rain-darkened coat. Bran waited beside him. The hound crossed the stones the moment Damaris stepped down, moving with such restrained urgency that one paw slipped on the wet flagging. He did not leap. He pressed his great head against her hip and remained there. Damaris laid one hand against his neck. "I'm here." Quentin watched the greeting from several paces away. The outer service gate is locked. 2 estate men are stationed at the side exit, and another is near the stable road. No one has entered the old coach house since dawn. Damaris looked toward the western buildings. Mr. Holden, following with his clerk and the estate steward, he was delayed by the lower bridge. And Gresham? He failed to appear in his office this morning. Mrs. Yates stepped down with the household keys. Tom Rigg is waiting at the stable yard. Quentin turned his attention to Damaris rather than giving an order. "How do you wish to proceed?" The question mattered more than ceremony. "Tom shows us where he left the records case. Mrs. Yates and I take the rear passage. You remain where you can see the gig road and both exits." His instinct to object appeared in the tightening of his jaw. Then he inclined his head. As you choose. Bran turned west before anyone called him. The old coach house stood beyond the main service buildings, reached by a covered walk and a muddy yard edged with unused carriage bays. Its doors were warped by damp. The air beneath the eaves smelled of straw, old timber and leather that had not been properly dressed in years. Tom Rigg waited with his cap clutched between both hands. He was pale enough that the freckles across his face stood out sharply. "It was there, miss." He pointed toward a narrow side door beside the harness room. "Mr. Gresham said the case held discarded accounts. I carried it from his office on the 9th and left it by that door. When I came back with another lamp, it had gone." "Did you see him take it inside?" Damaris asked. "No, miss. Only the drag marks in the straw." "Did he mention burning the papers?" "He said they'd be sorted for burning." Quentin's expression changed, but he did not interrupt. "Mrs." Yates tested the side door. "Locked. The rear passage joins the unused tack bay," Damaris said. "Its inner latch catches, but it can be opened from the harness room." "You know the route?" Quentin asked. "I carried linen to the coachman's quarters before the rooms were closed." She looked at Mrs. Yates. "We go together." They entered through the rear tack bay. The passage beyond was narrow enough that their skirts brushed the damp wall. Bran remained with Quentin at the yard entrance, though his attention never left Damaris. Halfway along, she saw a folded harness cloth lying on a peg where no cloth should have been. A fresh violet smear marked one corner. Damaris stopped. "Do not touch it, Mrs." Yates bent near enough to inspect the stain. "Copying ink." From beyond the next door came the scrape of wood, then the jingle of harness. A horse stamped in the yard. Gresham was not merely hiding the records. He was preparing to leave with them. Damaris pushed the door open. The harness room appeared empty at first. Coiled leather hung along one wall, and a workbench stood beneath a dirty window. Through the outer doorway, she saw Gresham fastening a black leather records case behind a waiting gig. He turned at the sound of her shoe against stone. Respectability vanished from his face. "You should have remained in Stokesley." Damaris did not cross the threshold. "The case belongs to Thornbeck. The contents belong to my office. Then Mr. Holden will determine that." Gresham moved quickly. He pulled the outer door shut from the yard and dropped its latch, sealing Damaris inside the harness room. Behind her, the passage door swung on its old spring and caught as Mrs. Yates reached it. For one breath, Damaris stood between two closed doors, while Gresham dragged the case toward the gig. Fear rose hot beneath her ribs. She forced herself to look at the room instead of the lock. The outer door was held by a simple wooden latch lifted through an iron tongue. A narrow gap showed beneath it. A long leather trace hung from a peg beside the workbench. Damaris took it down and fed the tapered end through the gap. "Miss Holt," Mrs. Yates called through the passage door. "I'm here." Damaris worked the trace upward. It slipped, burning across both palms. She tried again. The leather caught beneath the latch, but would not lift. Outside, harness buckles struck wood. Gresham climbed onto the gig. Damaris changed the angle, wrapped the trace around her wrist, and pulled with both hands. The edge scraped the skin below her thumb. The latch rose. The door opened hard enough to strike the wall. Gresham snapped the reins. The horse started forward and stopped. Bran stood in the gateway. He did not bark or bare his teeth. He simply occupied the road, vast and still, while the horse refused to advance toward him. Quentin stepped into the yard from the opposite side. "Step down, Gresham." Gresham drew the reins tighter. "Call off the animal." "Bran has not touched you or the horse. Quentin's voice remained level. The gate behind him is locked. The side exit is watched. Step down. Damaris emerged from the harness room with the leather trace in one hand. Gresham saw her and abandoned the gig. He ran toward the side yard, but 2 estate men closed the gate before he reached it. They did not seize or strike him. They stood in his path until he stopped. Mrs. Yates came through the reopened passage door and went directly to Damaris. Your hands, the skin of both palms was red. A shallow scrape below the thumb had begun to sting. It is nothing serious. Damaris looked toward the gig. No one opens the case. Quentin had already turned to the men. Mr. Gresham will wait in the estate office with 2 witnesses until the justice arrives. He is not to approach servants, records, or any horse. Gresham laughed once, without humor. You're letting a former maid command your house. Quentin looked first at Damaris, then at him. Miss Holt is a witness whose judgment I trust. You are a secretary found attempting to remove household records through a locked gate. Mr. Holden arrived 20 minutes later with his clerk and the estate steward. Before named witnesses, the records case was removed from the gig and placed on a trestle beneath the coach house lamps. Its lock showed no damage. Gresham's key opened it, but Mr. Holden lifted the lid only after his clerk had entered the time, place, condition of the case, and every person present in the daybook. Inside lay the black Morocco press copybook, wrapped in brown cloth beneath discarded account files. No page was turned. Mr. Holden wrapped the book again, placed it inside his locked deed box, sealed the outer compartment, and had the steward and Mrs. Yates sign across the fresh wax. The torn fragment remains in a separate packet, he said. Nothing will be compared here. By late afternoon, the local justice of the peace had heard Tom's account, the attempted departure, and the recovery of the records. Gresham was required to appear before the next petty sessions and forbidden to enter Thornbeck's offices or communicate with servants concerning the inquiry. He left the estate under lawful supervision, not ducal imprisonment. Only after the book was safe and the yard had emptied did Damaris feel her body begin to shake. She stepped away from the trestle. Quentin followed, then stopped beyond arm's reach. Damaris. She looked at him. Rain tapped against the coach house roof. Bran stood between them, watching. Quentin did not reach first. Damaris crossed the space and went into his arms. He paused for one heartbeat, giving her time to withdraw. She gripped the front of his coat. Then he held her, one hand settling carefully between her shoulders, the other light at her back. You waited, she whispered. His breath moved against her hair. You came out by your own strength. I only reached you after. Damaris closed her eyes. For the first time, being held did not feel like being contained. At their feet, Bran lowered himself onto the straw. Inside Mr. Halden's sealed deed box, the black book remained silent. But no one who had used it to write another woman's future could move it again. On the 25th of November, the truth was allowed to speak only as far as the evidence had earned the right to carry it. The examination took place in a locked records room at Thornbeck Hall, though the door remained open whenever a witness entered or left. Mr. Holden sat at the center table with his clerk and daybook. Mrs. Yates occupied the chair nearest Bess Calder. Damaris sat opposite Quentin, her right palm wrapped in clean linen where the leather trace had scraped below her thumb. The injury ached when she bent her hand, but the swelling had already lessened. Martha Bell, Nell Foster, and Eliza Pike had travelled from Stokesley under Edith Holt's protection. Each woman kept her original wage stub until Mr. Holden called her name. Bran lay outside the threshold, his head turned toward Damaris, while Quentin stood against the wall rather than taking the head of the table. Mr. Holden began with the packet containing the torn violet tissue. He read aloud the entry from his daybook, recording its receipt on the 4th of November. Damaris and Mrs. Yates inspected the wax and confirmed their signature remained unbroken. Only then did he cut the seal. The thin fragment emerged inside the folded linen in which Damaris had first placed it. The reversed violet words remained faint but legible. Dishonest conduct. A partial date. The 2nd of November, Mr. Holden placed the tissue between 2 panes of glass and moved it beneath the lamp. Next came the separate packet containing the false character Lady Sybil had read at the servants' benefit supper. Its seal, witnessed by the rector and visiting magistrate, was also examined before opening. The cream paper bore Damaris's name and the accusations already spoken before the county. Mr. Holden laid it aside without comment. At last he unlocked the compartment containing the black Morocco press copybook recovered from the coach house. The steward and Mrs. Yates inspected the wax applied on the 23rd. Mr. Holden opened the book for the first time in their presence. Its pages held reversed impressions of letters, characters, account instructions, and private notes. He turned slowly until the uneven lower edge appeared. The torn violet fragment was brought beside it. One jagged fibre met another. A narrow inward notch joined exactly. No pressure was needed. The fragment had come from that leaf. Bess's breath caught. Mr. Holden placed a magnifying glass over the copied entry. "The date is the 2nd of November," he said. "The language concerns Miss Calder's alleged dishonest conduct and refusal of correction." Bess stared at the page. "But he called me to his office on the 3rd. "Yes," Damaris said quietly. "He wrote the guilt before he asked you to create the appearance of agreeing with it." Bess covered her mouth. Mrs. Yates did not touch her until Bess reached first. Then the girl placed her hand in the housekeeper's, and Mrs. Yates held it. Mr. Holden continued through the pages without reading more than necessary. 6 leaves farther on, he found Damaris's false character copied into the book on the 12th of November. The wording matched the cream document exactly. Improper familiarity, encouraging discontent, seeking access to private rooms beyond duty. The page did not identify a former employer because none existed. It identified only the date on which the lie had been prepared at Thornbeck. Quentin's face hardened, but he remained silent. Damaris looked at him. "You believed it was false before you saw this?" "Yes. Now the page can protect more than my name." "Yes." He did not add another word. Mr. Holden turned to the fee pages, but stopped after several entries. The code M7 appeared beside multiple names. Initials had been placed near some amounts, while other lines referred to quarterly contributions and corrections. "There is a wider pattern here," he said. "I will enter every page in the written inventory. But I won't interpret initials or payments until each connected document and witness is before us. A suspicion is not yet a conclusion." Damaris inclined her head. The distinction mattered. Martha Bell approached the table first. She removed her worn wage stub from a tea tin and placed it in Mr. Holden's hand. He described its condition, amount, date, and M7 code in the daybook, then issued a signed receipt bearing her name. The stub entered its own envelope. Nell Foster followed with the paper she had kept inside a prayer book. Her receipt was separate. Eliza Pike deposited her original wage stub and the Marchmont circular she had shown Damaris in Stokesley. Mr. Holden marked the printed warning as Circular A, described the crest and general phrases, and sealed it separately so it could never be confused with another copy. "You remain the owner," he told Eliza. "I hold it only by your consent until the inquiry and any proceedings are complete." "That is what Miss Holt promised," Eliza said. Then Miss Holt understood the matter correctly. By late afternoon, the tissue match and the 2 forged characters had been established. The meaning of M7 had not. Lady Sybil's direct role had not. Damaris refused to present suspicion as proof merely because the room wanted a villain named. Bess watched every woman place evidence on the table and receive a paper proving it had not vanished into another household's control. When Mr. Halden asked whether she wished to complete her own statement, she looked first at Daniel's name in Mrs. Yates's stable inventory, where no chisel was missing, then at Damaris. "I'll speak at the public accounting," Bess said. "Only if you choose it," Damaris replied. "I do." The fear remained in Bess's face, but it no longer made the decision for her. On the 27th, a messenger arrived from a county housekeeper who had attended several Marchmont committee luncheons. He carried a sealed packet and a covering note addressed to Mr. Halden. The packet was entered in the daybook as Circular B. Its sender stated that Lady Sybil had handed it to her personally, and that it contained a handwritten direction concerning Gresham and the 7th placement list. Mr. Halden did not open it. "The sender has agreed to attend on the 29th, he said. "We will examine it then before named witnesses." The unopened packet went into a separate compartment of the deed box. Damaris left Thornbeck that evening, knowing her own character had been proved false. But the larger mechanism remained one locked door away from exposure. Quentin called formally at Edith Holt's house after dusk. Edith sat in the adjoining room sorting ribbons while the parlor door remained open. Damaris stood near the fire with the linen bandage still around her hand. Quentin stopped several feet from her. "I have spent most of my life assuming rank makes a request easier to answer," he said. "Now I understand it may make a truthful answer harder." Damaris waited. "Any kindness I show can look like a debt. Any affection I speak may sound like an instruction. I don't want gratitude from you. I don't want a yes given because I believed you, corrected your character, or helped recover the book. I'm no longer your servant. No, my name stands on evidence, not your preference. Yes, and I can refuse you without losing wages, shelter, or a character." Quentin's gaze remained steady, though uncertainty had entered it openly. "You can refuse me, and I will leave this room without changing one protection, one correction, or one promise." Damaris stepped closer. "Then ask me as Quentin, not as the Duke of Kelldale." He drew one careful breath. "May I kiss you?" The question rested between them without pressure. Damaris answered clearly, "Yes." She crossed the remaining distance herself. Quentin lifted one hand toward her face and paused before touching. Damaris leaned into his palm. Only then did he bend and kiss her. The kiss was gentle, restrained by all that had passed between them, and warmed by everything neither had yet spoken. Her uninjured hand settled against his coat. He did not deepen the kiss until she moved closer. When they parted, Quentin searched her face and began to step back. Damaris caught his lapel. "You may wait nearer than that." Surprise softened his expression. She drew him down and kissed him again. Brief, certain, and entirely her choice. Nothing difficult had been erased. Lady Sybil had not yet faced the women she had marked. M7 had not yet been explained. Yet when Damaris released him, affection had not taken her voice or purchased her forgiveness. It had asked, waited and received an answer freely given. On the 30th of November, the old riding school at Thornbeck Hall filled again beneath the Kenwood arms, but no supper softened the purpose of the gathering, and no music disguised the fact that reputations had been written there like sentences. Rows of chairs faced a plain central table. County household heads sat beside clergymen, senior servants, housekeepers, former servants, Mr. Holden, his clerk, and the local justice of the peace. Isaac Gresham occupied a guarded seat near the wall with a legal adviser at his side. He had been required to attend after appearing before the magistrate. But no one at Thornbeck had power to convict him. Lady Sybil Marchmont sat in the front row in pearl grey silk, her composure sharpened into something almost ceremonial. Damaris stood at the central table, with a narrow strip of linen protecting the last tenderness below her right thumb. Quentin stood half a pace behind her, not at the head of the room. Bran lay near the hem of her brown dress, his great head resting on his paws. 14 days earlier, the room had chosen the Duke's voice because it was easier than waiting for hers. Today, no one spoke before she did. Mr. Holden placed the first sealed packet on the table. "The documents before us have been preserved in my deed box," he said. "Their movements and condition are entered in my daybook. This gathering is a subscription accounting and household inquiry, not a court. The justice of the peace is present to determine whether formal information should proceed. Before the petty sessions." He looked toward Damaris. "You may begin when you choose, Miss Holt." Damaris saw Bess beside Mrs. Yates, Daniel among the lower stable servants, Martha Bell in borrowed black shoes, Nell Foster, with her hands folded over a worn prayer book, and Eliza Pike watching Lady Sybil without lowering her eyes. She drew one slow breath. Pressure tightened around the first word, but the silence held. Quentin did not move. On the 3rd of November, Bess Calder was ordered to sign a blank wage acknowledgement. The sentence carried. When she refused, Mr. Gresham threatened her employment, her character, and her brother's place. Mr. Holden opened the packet containing the violet tissue fragment after Damaris and Mrs. Yates confirmed their signatures across the original seal. The thin scrap was displayed between two panes of glass. The reversed violet phrase, "dishonest conduct," remained visible beside the partial date. Then the black Morocco press copybook was opened to the torn page. The ragged fibers met beneath the lamp. A narrow inward notch joined exactly. Damaris waited until the room had absorbed the match. The copied accusation against Bess was dated the 2nd of November, she said. The conduct later used to justify it was alleged on the 3rd. The justice of the peace leaned forward. Therefore, the accusation existed before the supposed offence. "Yes, sir." Mr. Holden turned 6 leaves farther. The false character Lady Sybil's had read at the supper appeared in the book, copied on the 12th of November. Its wording matched the cream document line for line, improper familiarity, encouraging discontent, seeking private access beyond duty. There was no former employer named because no former employer had written it. Lady Sybil's expression did not change. "That proves Mr. Gresham fabricated a paper," she said. "It does not prove I instructed him." Damaris looked at her. "Then we will proceed to what the paper was designed to protect." Bess rose. Her hands trembled, but she did not hide them. Mrs. Yates walked beside her and stopped before touching. Bess chose to take the housekeeper's arm. "Mr. Gresham said I owed money for wine glasses and scorched linen I didn't damage," she said. "He told me to sign before the sum was written. When I refused, he said Daniel would lose his place and a missing chisel could be found among his things. Gresham's adviser leaned toward him, but Bess continued. I saw Miss Holt's false character on his desk before the supper. I was afraid to warn her. She turned toward Damaris. She never asked me to risk Daniel to save her name. She told me my fear wasn't evidence against her. I am speaking now because I choose to. Daniel stepped forward only when called. The stable inventory, signed by the stable master and Mrs. Yates, showed that no chisel or other tool had ever been missing. The first wave of proof ended without applause. It did not need any. The lie against Damaris had been written at Thornbeck. The threat against Bess had been prepared before disobedience existed. Damaris placed one hand against the table. The second matter concerns women whose wages and futures were altered by the same method. Martha Bell came first. She removed her original stub from the separate envelope Mr. Halden had sealed after issuing her a receipt. The code M7 stood beside £1 and 8 shillings entered for a uniform she had never received. I questioned the sum, Martha said. A month later, I took my trunk to another house. The housekeeper read my character on the step and closed the servant's door. I sold my boots to pay for one more night's lodging. She looked down at the borrowed shoes beneath her skirt. No one asked whether the paper was true. Nell Foster's stub recorded medical expenses entered before her mother died. Eliza Pike's showed a fee deducted in exchange for a favorable character. When Eliza asked for the money back, Lady Sybil's placement circle warned 3 households against her. Mr. Halden opened the corresponding pages in the copybook. The same M7 code appeared beside each name. So did the same phrases: resists correction, encourages discontent, unfit for recommendation. The women had not been disciplined after wrongdoing. Their characters had been shaped after they questioned money. A murmur moved through the rows. Lady Sybil lifted her chin. Committees must maintain standards. Mr. Gresham may have misused an internal mark, but a code is not conspiracy. No, Damaris said. That is why there is a third matter, Mr. Halden brought forward Circular A, Eliza's copy, which contained the general Marchmont warning and remained identified by its own receipt. Then he placed a second packet beside it. Circular B had arrived sealed from a county housekeeper on the 27th. On the 29th, it had been opened before named witnesses, described in the daybook, copied into the inventory, and resealed. The county housekeeper now stood from the second row. Lady Sybil handed it to me herself after a Marchmont committee luncheon. She said, she told me the women on her 7th placement list were not to be engaged without correction through Mr. Gresham. Mr. Halden broke the reseal and unfolded the circular. Beneath the Marchmont crest, Lady Sybil's own hand had written, names entered upon Marchmont List 7 are to be sent to Mr. Gresham for correction before recommendation. Quarterly committee contributions are to pass through the same office. The code M7 no longer required speculation. The county housekeeper identified Lady Sybil's initials beside several names in the copybook. Lady Sybil stood. You mistake administrative discipline for personal wrongdoing. Those contributions maintained charitable placements. Servants who moved from house to house after disputing their employers endangered every respectable household. Did household order require accusations written before an offence occurred? Damaris asked. You cannot reduce 12 difficult women to one unfortunate date. The number entered the room before Lady Sybil understood what she had revealed. No witness had announced 12. Mr. Halden had shown only 3 names and selected pages. The county housekeeper looked toward the unopened portion of the written inventory. Gresham turned on Lady Sybil with sudden fury. You reviewed every name. His adviser caught his sleeve, but he continued. You approved the language and took the committee share. You forged the entries. At your direction. You expect anyone to believe a disgraced secretary over the daughter of an earl? Damaris raised one hand. His accusation is not the proof. The room quieted again. The proof is the date written before Bess's refusal. The false character against me copied before the supper. The 3 original stubs, the M7 entries, Circular A, Circular B, the county housekeeper's testimony. Lady Sybil's handwriting and her knowledge of women whose number had not been stated. Lady Sybil's rank remained intact. Its moral power did not. Several people looked toward Bran as though the hound might supply a final verdict more satisfying than paper. Damaris saw them. Bran is not evidence, she said. He does not know who forged a character or who took a fee. He follows me because I allow him to choose his distance. The documents are evidence. These women are witnesses. Their words are enough. Bran rested his head against her skirt. Mr. Holden summarized what would now pass into formal proceedings. The Justice of the Peace directed that informations be laid before the next petty sessions concerning forged characters, fraudulent wage deductions, and demands made through threats. He stated plainly that no criminal guilt was being adjudged in the riding school. Gresham would answer through lawful process. The copybook, stubs, circulars, and sealed papers would remain in Mr. Holden's custody for formal production. Quentin did not speak until Damaris turned and looked at him. Then he stepped forward. Miss Holt's character was true before this room found it convenient to believe her. He said, I failed her when I answered in her place and called that protection. I made my rank the reason no one had to wait for her. Protection without voice becomes another form of control. He faced the household and county guests. Mr. Gresham is dismissed from Thornbeck and permanently barred from its records and employment. House Kenwood will lay the formal complaints required and fund an independent accounting of every disputed deduction. Lady Sybil Marchmont no longer holds any Keldale patronage, subscription office, or recommendation authority. Every household that received a false warning will receive a written correction. Mrs. Yates will hold sole authority over female servant characters. No wage acknowledgement may be signed blank. Every character must be read aloud before the servant acknowledges it. Bess Calder and Daniel Calder will suffer no retaliation. The inquiry ended slowly. Lady Sybil left beneath the eyes of householders who had once treated her recommendations as certainty. Gresham departed under the direction already given by the magistrate. Martha Bell received written confirmation that her claim for repayment had been entered. Nell's false debt was struck from the household account. Eliza's character was corrected in Mr. Holden's presence. Only after the room had nearly emptied did Quentin approach Damaris. Edith and Mrs. Yates remained nearby. Bran lay between the abandoned rows. Quentin stopped at a proper distance. Your name stands without mine, he said. May I now ask permission to court you? Damaris stepped toward him. You may. Emotion moved through his restraint. I love you, Damaris. Not because you made Bran gentle, but because you showed me gentleness requires the strength to wait. She placed her hand in his. I love you too, Quentin, and I choose you with my own voice. He bent and kissed her fingers. Damaris touched his cheek, and he leaned into her palm only after she offered it. At her feet, Bran gave a quiet sigh. The room was silent again, but this time no one had been silenced. The winter after the inquiry did not turn Thornbeck Hall into a place of justice by proclamation. It changed one written instruction, one corrected account, and one difficult conversation at a time. Quentin called at Mrs. Edith Holt's rooms in Stokesley with proper notice throughout December, January, and February. He never arrived without the expectation of a chaperone, and he never shortened the courtship because society assumed a duke's preference should become another person's decision. Some county families stopped calling at Thornbeck. 2 declined the wedding invitation before one had formally been sent. A London society column described the match as astonishing, though the writer knew neither Damaris nor the servants whose futures Lady Sybil's committee had damaged. Quentin placed the paper beside the fire unread. Damaris picked it up first. "You don't have to protect me from print," she said. "I wasn't protecting you." "No, I was protecting myself from writing an answer unworthy of postage." She laughed, and the sound surprised them both. Their courtship grew not through spectacle, but through disagreement survived without punishment. When Quentin proposed issuing the new servant character rules across every Kenwood estate before Christmas, Damaris read the draft and set it down. "You have ordered every housekeeper to follow a system none of them helped shape. The safeguards are sound. That isn't the point." The first pressure tightened around her next sentence. Quentin waited. "If you make consultation look like delay, they will obey you in public and preserve the old habits in private." His instinct to defend speed showed in the angle of his shoulders. Then he sat back. "What do you suggest? Call the housekeepers and stewards estate by estate. Ask where coercion hides in their own books. Then write the order." He followed her advice. The final, household instructions required every servant character to be read aloud, every wage advance to state the full amount and purpose before signature, and every female servant reference to bear the housekeeper's approval. No blank acknowledgement was permitted. No servant could be punished merely for asking to hear what had been written about her. Quentin did not call the changes Damaris's gift to House Kenwood. He entered them as obligations long neglected. Mr. Halden kept the black Morocco press copybook, the torn violet fragment, the forged character, the 3 original wage stubs, Circular A and Circular B, in legal custody. At the petty sessions, Isaac Gresham was committed for trial on charges arising from forged characters, fraudulent deductions, and threats used to obtain money or signatures. The civil accounting continued under Mr. Holden's supervision, so that disputed sums could be traced without depending upon Gresham's willingness to admit them. Lady Sybil Marchmont, advised by her family's solicitor, entered a repayment arrangement for committee contributions connected to the false placements. She remained the daughter of an earl. She no longer controlled a single Kelldale recommendation. Her social circle did not vanish, but its certainty did. Some households continued to receive her. Fewer trusted what she said after the door closed. Martha Bell was the first woman to receive practical repair. Her false character was withdrawn, the disputed deduction entered for repayment, and a housekeeper's near Ripon offered her absolution after reading Mr. Holden's correction. Martha wrote to Damaris on clean paper because, she said, she wanted one record of her life that had begun with truth. Damaris kept the letter, not as evidence, but as proof that reform mattered only when it opened an actual door. The marriage settlement required nearly 3 weeks, because Damaris refused to sign a clause she had not examined. Edith chose an independent solicitor on her behalf. The final settlement guaranteed Damaris a personal allowance, protected any property she might later receive, and placed the fund for former servants outside ordinary household accounts. Quentin read every amendment. "You understand that you don't need my permission to use what is yours," he said when the last draft was complete. "And you understand that I won't thank you for recognizing it." His mouth curved. "I was hoping for approval." Damaris placed her hand in his. "You may have that." He raised her fingers and kissed them, still smiling. They were married on the 5th of April, 1879, in the parish church 2 miles from Thornbeck. No ballroom awaited them. No crowd of titled strangers filled the pews to witness a social triumph. Mrs. Yates sat beside Edith Holt. Bess and Daniel Calder attended with the household. Mr. Halden came with the marriage settlement secured in his case. Bran lay near the vestry door, too large for any pew and too solemn for anyone to object. Damaris wore ivory wool with a modest lace collar and carried no jewel borrowed from the Kenward vaults. She spoke her vows in her own voice. Once a word caught. Quentin did not complete it. He waited until she finished. Only after both names had been entered in the register did she become Her Grace, the Duchess of Kelldale. Quentin looked at the line she had written. "You kept every part of it." "I intend to keep every part of myself." "Good." His answer came without hesitation. "That is the woman I married." On the 19th of April, spring light filled Thornbeck's servants' hall, while the first new character book lay open on the long table. No county audience had been invited. The change belonged first to the people whose futures the book might hold. Mrs. Yates stood at Damaris's right. Bess Calder faced them in a clean grey dress, nervous but upright. Quentin waited near the door rather than at the head of the room. Bran lay beside Damaris's chair with his great head against her skirt. Her mother's dented silver thimble rested beside the inkstand. Its flattened side caught the light. It had not been repaired. It did not need perfection to remain useful. Mrs. Yates read Bess's character aloud. "Bess Calder has served at Thornbeck Hall with diligence, honesty, and increasing competence. She showed courage under pressure and has since assisted junior servants with the linen inventory. She leaves no debt to this household." Bess's eyes filled. "I'm not leaving, Ma'am." "No, Mrs." Yates said, "but a truthful character should exist before you need it." Damaris turned the book toward Bess. "Do you agree with every line?" Bess read slowly. She stopped at courage under pressure. "I was frightened." "Courage doesn't require the absence of fear," Damaris said. "Only that fear doesn't write the final line." Bess nodded. "Then I agree." Mrs. Yates signed first. Bess signed beneath the acknowledgement that every word had been read to her. Damaris lifted the pen. For one instant, she remembered another room, another paper, and a frightened girl ordered to sign before the words existed. Then she wrote in a firm hand, "Damaris Kenward, Duchess of Kelldale." Her own name stood first. The title followed it. She closed the book before looking toward Quentin. He extended one open hand. He did not call her away from the work merely because the work was finished. Damaris chose when to place her fingers in his. In the private passage beyond the hall, she stopped beneath a narrow window warmed by afternoon sun. "Quentin." He turned. She rose onto her toes and kissed him before he could ask. Surprise held him for one heartbeat. Then his arms came around her, careful and certain, and he returned the kiss with the tenderness of a man who no longer mistook restraint for distance. When they parted, his forehead rested lightly against hers. "I love you," he said. The words had been spoken before. They had not become less necessary. Damaris touched his face. I love you too." Outside, the spring courtyard shone after rain. Bran followed Damaris across the stones like the gentle shadow he had always chosen to be. After several paces, he stopped and looked back at Quentin. Damaris felt her husband's hand tighten softly around hers. Bran waited until Quentin came level with them, then moved between the two, close enough that his coat brushed both their sides. Together they crossed beneath the April sun, and no one walking there had to surrender her voice, her name, or her choice in order to belong.